Hello, Packers fans, and welcome into PackersNews.com. I'm Kassidy Hill, joined by Pete Dougherty. Pete, we are getting ready, or at least I'm getting ready to pack up for Baltimore. Have you packed yet?
I have not. I will take care of that tonight. I travel light, so it doesn't take very long.
Smart. I have to leave my house at 4 a.m., so I'm packing
What?
tonight because I'm dumb. I'm
Did
the
you? Are you on like a 6 a.m. flight or something?
I'm on an 8 a.m. flight out of Milwaukee.
Oh,
I know, I know. I bought my tickets later, and by that time there was not a lot left. I
yeah.
also bought my tickets before COVID protocols got bad again, and I had all intents and purposes of like spending a day in DC as a tourist, seeing all the Christmas decorations and everything. And I don't know if that's all going to happen now, but we'll see. Speaking of some COVID changing things, Packers made it through the recent NFL COVID surge relatively unscathed. I mean, not that you want anyone to be ill or to deal with anything, um, and that's not to diminish Kenny Clark having to now be on the COVID list, and we wish him all the best and hope he's healthy. But when you look around the league, Pete, I mean, over 100 players on the COVID list this week alone. The Browns, the Rams, and the Washington football team all had to have games postponed because over half of their roster was put on the reserve COVID-19 list. Does it feel almost like the Packers got away with it? Got away with something to come out of this with only one guy on the list?
So far, I mean, but like as we've seen, when it hits, it can hit fast and
Right.
hard. So who knows what might happen next week now with the tightened protocols. I wonder. I mean, it sounds like the league might just keep going with
Mm-hmm.
um, no no meetings in meeting rooms anymore. You either have to meet virtually or
Mm-hmm.
outside or in your indoor practice facility where there's all that space and good
Mm-hmm.
ventilation. Um, but so far they've made it through okay. But as we've seen with this thing, it just comes and goes in waves.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think with the Browns, they had 20 guys in one day get put on the list. That now means the Browns game has been postponed to Monday night against the Raiders. They'll play the Raiders on Monday, and as of now, scheduled to play the Packers on Christmas Day. So that's 5 days later. Do you think that the league will keep to that schedule, or will they change it up? And if so, are you looking at a Browns team that's sort of limping in here?
Yeah, I mean it's probably kind of fluid, but you know I'm thinking that if it was a likely thing, they would have already just changed it and let the Browns know they get that extra day. So
Mhm.
my guess is the league will, if at all possible, just keep the schedule as it is. I don't know this, but there's only a couple games on that Saturday. They probably don't want to move any games out of there unless they absolutely feel like they have to. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing here, no inside info or anything, but
Mhm.
I'm kind of guessing that game ends up being played on. Is that Christmas Day?
Christmas Day.
That game ends up being played on
Merry
Christmas Day.
Christmas. What a Christmas day. Interesting question here for Mike. Have the Packers thought about not letting players do the Lambeau leap and hug other players after the game, etc., due to COVID?
So I'm thinking back to last year. I think the league basically outlawed the Lambeau Leap stuff
Mhm.
last year. But what they're finding out is brief contacts. I mean, because no, they have not traced any cases
To
to
the games.
players on the field. So
Right.
guys are hitting. Their faces are right up next to each other. But
Hmm.
it sounds like because it's outside and because it's so temporary, such a short time when people are that close together, that the risk of being infected is really, really low. So I don't know if they'll tell players not to do the Lambeau leap or not. Maybe they will. I
Hmm.
don't think anybody has thought. I haven't seen anybody ask LaFleur that, have they? So
Hmm.
I don't know. I think they do discourage after the game, not not hugging opponents.
Right.
I think they are encouraging just go to the locker room. I think some guys are still doing it, but
Hmm. Yeah, I know last year you weren't allowed. You weren't allowed to do jersey swaps. You weren't allowed
yeah,
to hug or anything like that.
right.
Yeah, seeing a little bit of a difference this year, as guys being a little bit more cautious. But and maybe after this week, we'll see them be a lot more cautious. But this week in particular, as we said, Packers travel to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, which is an interesting matchup, Pete. It's not one we see too often, just the way the schedule shakes out. The Ravens are almost like a team of contradictions and juxtaposition. I think they have one of the top 3 rushing offenses, and then the best rushing defense and one of the worst passing defenses. And so on offense in particular for the Ravens, even if Lamar Jackson's not in there, they run so much play action. They run so much off ball, like stuff like that. Matt LaFleur said over and over this week, our defense has to be disciplined. So with that in mind, what is sort of the biggest key that they need to take into this game?
Well, part of it is even, whether it's Jackson or Huntley, is that
Tyler Huntley,
right? I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're simply, obviously Huntley is nowhere near as good as Jackson.
Don't you dare disrespect. I'm just kidding.
And they're not that different as far as styles go. So with this guy, they're going to want to keep him in the pocket. And they faced that a few times. It's what they would have faced to the extreme. If Jackson plays, that's what they'll face to the extreme. So that means staying in your rush lanes, bull rushing more than trying to get around your guy. Don't go past the ends. Don't go past the quarterback. Don't get deeper than the quarterback when you're rushing them. I think that all those things will be really important. And, you mentioned the pass defense. The Ravens are missing. I mean, they lost Marlon Humphrey, who's one of the better corners in the league. Marcus Peters is a very good corner. They lost one starting safety earlier in the year. Now their other one is on the COVID list right now because of COVID, and he's a quarterback of their defensive backfield, basically. So that's probably a pretty big reason why their pass defense ranks as low as it does.
Mm-hmm. And then, like we said, on the opposite side, one of the best rushing offenses. We've talked to a lot of defensive linemen this week, more than anything because of how many are going to have to step up with Kenny Clark being out. And Dean Lowry had this to say today about what it was going to take to sort of face this Ravens offense. Dean, your coaches have mentioned ad nauseum this week how difficult this offense is and how it's different than every other offense in the league. What is it that makes them so unique to defend?
They do a lot of different things. They don't have many tendencies in their formation, and then obviously with their running game, they use the quarterback a lot. So they almost always have a +1 kind of in their offense compared to what we have. So I think it comes down to just playing fundamentals, and it's one of those games where we don't really know where the ball is going to go, and they have some talented guys in the backfield. But if we just do our job and do our 111th, we'll be fine.
Do our 111th, isn't that the mantra of this team?
That's one of Matt. That's a LaFleurism, yes.
With the LaFleurism. We do have some questions in here, so we'll take some of those, starting with Ron. Will Bach play on Christmas Day? We know he's not going to play this week. He's already been ruled out, but he has now put together a full week of practice. How encouraging is that to maybe see him back by the Browns game?
I would think there's at least a chance. I mean, you saw him out there. What do you think? Out there
he's
on the
moving okay. For everything I saw him with, he was moving okay. But granted, every time I saw him, it was individual work or, up against a pad. I haven't seen him take a hit or try to hold off, a 350-pound man. And that's going to be the key. Well, I guess he's down on the end, so it wouldn't be quite a 350, maybe more of a 260. That's still going to be a lot different. What does it look like when pads are on and pads are thumping? Can he take the pressure on that knee and on that ACL? How is it going to hold up when he's being driven back? And we haven't, at least in the open media times, seen him have to do that yet. Then again, I mean, you see those offensive linemen all the time play with a brace on. So do you think he's far enough out from the surgery that a brace could be sufficient?
It's funny. I was interesting. I was talking with a doctor for another NFL team about those knee surgeries last year. And actually, they don't wear the brace for the support coming off an ACL surgery. They really wear it more because it stimulates, it's on your skin and it stimulates nerves, and it helps your brain reconnect the new ACL and the new neurons that the ACL grows, because when it's put in, it doesn't have any, so that you get to know, your brain gets to know where your knee is in space. And that's just something that, none of us ever thinks about. Because,
no, I can guarantee you I've never thought about that.
Yeah, because it's just the way our life has been, and all those connections were made when we were children, and so you're fine. But we have to reconnect all those, and that's actually why they wear the brace through about the year mark.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, once you're a year after surgery or a little more than that, then if the player doesn't like the brace, he can just take it off. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know, I think Bakhtiari, from the photos I saw, I think he's wearing a brace still, isn't he? He just came off, the arthroscopic surgery too. So that set back, his comeback. And, I don't know if he'll play next week or not. It'll be, I was starting to wonder if, will they do it where maybe they put him in for a series here or there for the first game, or do they expect him to go the full 60?
Matt LaFleur actually was asked about that today. He said with Bakhtiari, Jair, maybe even Zadarius Smith, do you want to have them ready to play a full game, or could you do a series at a time? And he essentially said, since none of them are playing this weekend, he hasn't given any thought. He's only looking at who he's got for this weekend against the Ravens. I'm sure that he has given it thought, but
I'm sure he has. I'm sure they've discussed it thoroughly with their medical team. But as we all know, they do not like to reveal these plans because they treat every scrap of info as major intelligence, and they don't want the other teams knowing what they're thinking about anything.
Right, exactly. You never know what Myles Garrett might be cooking up if he knows that Bakhtiari is going to be back in there next week. We had several questions, speaking of Zadarius Smith. Brian and Randy both asked about Zadarius Smith. Pete, I've heard nothing new. Have you? Just same old, same old?
Yeah. And I remember hearing way back in September that they were thinking, mid-December was realistic. So we're at mid-December now.
Yeah.
So if he's, if he's going to come back for the playoffs, I would think they would want him back. They would be hoping he could be back with at least 2 games to go in the regular season, just to get used to playing at game speed. It's been so long. He's played such little football since, the end of last season. Because he didn't practice in camp. One day of practice in camp, and that was it. And then a week of practice in the first game, 20 snaps, and he hasn't played since. So, but I still think it's possible for all 3 of those guys. I haven't written off any of those 3 coming back. I guess the big question is, how good will they be coming off of major injuries? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking Alexander has the best chance to get back into playing speed and all that the quickest, because having a shoulder injury, at least he could do all the footwork stuff. Once the shoulder was feeling okay, he's been able to do all the footwork drills and running drills.
And he's looked the best at practice. But granted, again, we haven't really seen him take a hit yet or try to level a guy in the open field. And, sometimes, especially, not that a corner is really coming across the open field, but if he had to, he's going to lead with his shoulder. And we haven't seen him try to do that yet. And that could be a huge determining factor in when he plays. Let's see, someone up here, Jamie asked, is Cobb done for the season? We're not sure, but think so. Is that sort of the word you're hearing as well?
Yeah, and he was out there jogging around the field today, right?
Right, but just by himself
this week. Yeah. So I remember Mike Flanagan had that kind of surgery for the core muscle injury way back, and being an offensive lineman, he could come back really fast. I think he was back in like 3 weeks. I think the longest it usually takes to come back from those is 6 weeks, but it can be a little quicker than that. So, Even
So he can be
as
available
long as
for
they're
the
in the playoffs, I would think he's got at least a shot at getting back.
Okay. One of the reasons that it's crucial that he's still out there this week at practice, even if he's sort of doing his own thing, is because he can stay in Amari Rogers' ear. And so that's what I kind of wanted to bring up next. And someone even asked about this in here. Sorry, y'all are busy on the questions today. I love it. I appreciate it. It just means I got to go back through and search for them. Here we go. Mike asked, essentially why LaFleur is staying with Mo Drayton. And before we get into this, I wanted to add the tidbit about Randall Cobb. Drayton said this week that before Randall Cobb was hurt, that the plan was to essentially get him in more on the return game to, one, give Amari Rogers a mental break, because you start dropping them, you start muffing them, you start thinking you're going to drop or muff everyone. So he wanted to give Amari Rogers a mental break, but he also essentially wanted to show Amari Rogers, this is how you do it. And Randall Cobb was going to be his example. He doesn't have that ability now with Randall Cobb hurt, but I asked him about it this week, and he wants Randall Cobb to still be there at practice to sort of walk Amari Rogers through the return game and how you handle different situations. So all of that to say, Pete, is I know it's usually been one thing or the other. It feels like they've got the kicking game sort of together. The return game the return coverage was abysmal against the Bears, but how much of that was Grant? And then the return game itself, how much of it is Amari Rogers? Are all of these problems attributable to Mo Drayton, or is it just coincidental that he's had sort of a round robin of problems in every aspect of special teams thus far this year?
Yeah, well, it's a bad sign that it's like whack-a-mole, where there's a problem here, then a problem there, and they keep, bouncing up in different places. I can't tell you for sure, not being in the meetings and, what they're emphasizing and how they're teaching. It's a lot of it falls on the players too. But yeah, ultimately it's the coach who's responsible. As far as, firing him, I just don't see, unless there's a problem with, it's just huge red flags of, problems with players, or that Drayton's been insubordinate in any way, not doing what LaFleur's been asking him to, then you make a change. But this late in the season, I just don't know what. I mean, maybe for one game, it'll make you feel better. It'll make fans feel better, the ones who are upset that they fire the guy. But does it really actually solve any of your issues? And you look at who would take over. I mean, his top assistant has had 1 year as a special teams assistant, I think it was at Vanderbilt, came to the Packers in 19 and was a special teams quality control guy for 2 years, and just got promoted to assistant this year. I mean, do you really think that guy is ready to coordinate a special teams? There's no way I would do that if I were LaFleur. Bringing in somebody from the outside who doesn't know the players, he'd have to learn. You can't change the scheme at this point in the season and start over. That would be counterproductive. So he'd have to incorporate what he usually does into this scheme. That seems like a non-starter to me too. I think they just have to ride it out, and if nothing else, do everything they can to minimize the damage. Find somebody who can kick the ball out of the end zone, punt the ball out of bounds as much as you can, and fair catch punts, and hope that the kickoffs, you can get touchbacks on the kickoffs, or just tell whoever's bringing the ball back, you protect that ball at all costs and don't worry about where you end up. That's until they get away for a couple weeks away from having. I mean, what word did you use? Abysmal. That was abysmal. That special teams performance the other night. They just need, maybe they'll string together some better games and feel better about it. But I would just, if I were them, I would try to minimize the damage. And I'm sure what they're going to do, it sure sounds like, LaFleur said all hands on deck Monday. And so we'll probably start seeing some guys who play a lot on offense and defense, especially on defense. We'll probably see them on some of these coverage units. I don't see how the return game is going to get any better unless they bring in a new returner, because their best returner was Kylan Hill, and he blew out his knee returning the kickoff. And Amari Rogers just hasn't looked very dynamic doing it. So, that's the key thing. A good return guy can make the return unit and the blockers look really good. to have a good return game.
Bears showed that.
Yeah.
The Bears were a clear indicator of that. And Terry pointed out to Terry, Amari looks slow when it comes to the return game. What is your take? Doesn't seem to explode once the ball is in his hands. Seems very hesitant. At this point, he may be scared.
He might be, which you can't have that. But yeah, he doesn't. He's never looked explosive on anything that he's done so far this year. He's definitely not as explosive as advertised. Now, maybe, he's built like a running back, so maybe as a receiver, you get the ball to him, and his run after the catch, he can shed tackles. So maybe that's part of the thing with him too. I think he's a 210-pound guy, which is pretty big for a receiver, even though he's short. But he sure this year has not looked like a, quick, fast guy with the ball in his hands. So I
had a roster right here.
I agree with Terry all the way there.
Good job, Terry. Thought I had a roster right here, but I don't. You're just talking about possibly using like every hands on deck this week for special teams. They did elevate Winfrey. He was thrown out as a possibility, and Matt LaFleur basically said if he's dressed, he's helping on special teams. And I think there's something to that because when you look at it, I mean, Pete, give me your opinion, but in my opinion, two of the best special teams players that they've had this year as far as like coverage has been Equinemius St. Brown and Rasul Douglas, and those are two starters or EQ, starter depending maybe on the situation. Big contributor. And they both made on special teams, and they've made insane plays.
Yeah, he looked great on St. Brown looked great on coverage on punts, and you did that story about him, and he's been standing. He had been standing out in that. So him getting hurt the other day didn't help. Getting the concussion didn't help either. But yeah, I think LaFleur mentioned Douglas by name. The thing I was wondering about with Winfrey wasn't whether he's going to play on special teams. It was whether they would use him in the return game. And obviously they're not going to say anything because they don't want Baltimore to know who's going to be out there. But I wonder if Winfrey will be out there for either for either punts or kicks or both of them.
And some of that is trying to read between the lines of what Matt LaFleur said, because he was asked if Winfrey could be as a returner. And that's when he essentially said, if he's dressed, he's going to be on special teams. So he didn't say, no, he won't return. So I'm reading a little bit between the lines, but we'll wait and see. We'll find out Sunday. And then, here's another good one from Mick. When Bakhtiari returns, is Nyman one of the best five, and where would each play? It's a good question.
Yeah, I'm wondering the same too. I don't know if they would like him or Kelly more at right tackle, at least till if and when Turner comes back. But I would think it's at least a possibility that Yash Nyman would move to right tackle. So I remember I had a chat earlier this year, and a couple weeks ago, and somebody asked about guard. I don't remember him ever taking a snap at guard in camp, but I'm pretty sure he got work at some work at right tackle, even though he worked more on the left side. Pretty sure he took some snaps in there, and that actually might be his long-term position in the NFL is right tackle. So I would think it's at least a possibility that they'd play him over there instead of Kelly. I don't know what they're thinking though.
Mm-hmm. Someone mentioned that Amari Rogers returned. Mike mentioned that Amari Rogers returned punts in college. He did at Clemson. He followed Ray McLeod, if I'm remembering correctly, who is now a return man for the Steelers. And let me see okay, I got it pulled up. Amari Rogers' first year as the starter returning punts, he averaged 7.6 yards per return. His junior year, he averaged 8.4. And then his senior year, he averaged 7.11. So not horrible numbers, but not necessarily someone you draft to be a returner.
Yeah, that's a little underwhelming. I remember thinking that when they picked him and seeing those numbers and thinking, it's not like this guy was, just killing people with his punt returning, but maybe they saw something they really liked in that regard. But it hasn't, whatever they liked hasn't shown up yet for sure. And, receiver, who knows, it still could, but I'm just not seeing a really good return guy there. I just with what he's done with the ball in his hands.
Rebecca with an interesting question, because our colleagues Tom Silverstein has mentioned this as well. Can Chandon Sullivan return punts? That's a name that Spoon has brought up more than once as a possibility.
I forgot about him because he does. Yeah. I think he did. Even with the Packers, he might have. I'd have to look to see if he's had any returns in games. He definitely has been back there in training camp for sure. I remember him at times because when they go through punt drills, they'll have 3 or 4 guys back there, sometimes just 2, but I need 2 to 4 guys back there, and they just rotate through who catches the punt and returns it on each rep. And I know for sure Sullivan did at least some of that.
There was someone who I'm trying to remember. It was an offensive lineman. I want to say Runyon, but there was an offensive lineman who was telling us last week about the fact that he had 2 punt returns before. And maybe not
in high school, or I wonder what.
No, it was in I thought it was in the NFL. I'll have to go back and look because I remember thinking he was joking. And no, turns out he was telling the truth. He had returned 2 punts. I'll see if I can find it as we're kind of pulling up the next question here. And not to completely dump on Amari Rodgers. He is a talented kid. He just hasn't found his footing yet. This could be a fun weekend for him. He saw what happened in the Rams and Cardinals game this past weekend with Van Jefferson and his father. And Amari Rodgers is playing against his father this weekend. So, maybe that'll be a little bit of extra motivation to go out there and show up dad who taught him everything he knows. His dad is, of course, the wide receivers coach for the Baltimore Ravens. So that could be fun. Lucas Patrick. Thank you, Rebecca. I knew it was a lineman. Lucas Patrick has 2 kick returns. Okay.
Kick returns. Yeah. Because he's back there. Sometimes he's back in that. I've even seen him line up back where there's a guy in the middle deep and then the two wings were blockers. I think he's lined up there a couple times. I remember I'm blanking on the guy's name, but Packers played the Patriots in New England years ago, 10 years ago or so. And they had an offensive lineman return a kickoff like 60 some yards deep into Packers territory. It was just a big thing. It's why if you let me just say something real quick here, because I see there's a bunch of questions from Mike Fagan. And
I was about to,
I wondered because I went to high school with a guy named Mike Fagan. When I saw that, I wondered if that was him. And I thought, no way.
Did you play at Memorial?
He made a reference to Memorial because I went to Madison Memorial High School. So I guarantee you that's Mike Fagan from that I know from high school. So hello, Mike.
Mike, do you have any footage of Pete returning kicks?
I did not play football in high school. I'd have gotten killed.
Those who can't do right.
That's correct.
Yeah, Mike mentioned Rasul Douglas and Randy as well. Randy said, I like Douglas who got the pick 6. Mike, Rasul Douglas can do it all. Let's put him back for returns. I think that they're both saying, I think both Mike and Randy are saying this tongue in cheek, but it's not a horrible idea. He clearly has ball skills and he's fast. I mean,
he is. Now with punt returners, you're looking for, that's all about quickness, lateral, that's why Chandon Sullivan, because he's a nickel corner, slot corner, small. They're usually almost always smaller guys because it's all about quick lateral move and then getting upfield. With kickoff returner, it's more just about dead speed, hitting it hard, hitting it up there and just going.
Mm-hmm.
So kickoff return, I could see for Douglas. Punt return, I would think less likely unless he can unless he's really good at catching it, and then just put him back there and have him fair catch it.
At this point, what do they have to lose?
Right.
Might as well. Last thing before we wrap up here, let's just touch a little bit on this. As we mentioned, and as Pete, you were saying earlier, so if you're watching this, you can go back and see what Pete said if you missed it. Ravens with the best rushing defense in the league, second to worst passing defense. Some of that has to do with what they've lost in the secondary. They've now lost Marlon Humphrey as well. But because of that, how much do you see the Packers sort of maybe shifting away from the 1-2 punch of Aaron Jones and Dillon, which has been they've been very balanced, I guess is what I'm trying to say. How much do you see them shifting away from Jones and Dillon and relying more on Adams and Lazard and MVS, who is now questionable for this weekend, but MVS, EQ, if he's able to get back out there as well?
So everything I've been reading from pundits is that they're looking for the Packers to throw the ball 40 times because of all the reasons you just went through. but I'm guessing they're still going to want to at least try to run the ball and see if they can. Maybe this is a game where you come out throwing, you throw your first 4 plays, and then you start running the ball some. They no matter how they do it, they got to get the ball in those 2 guys' hands, Jones and Dillon. Now it can be swing passes and screens, and even with Jones, they'll throw circle routes downfield to him. But those guys are so good with the ball in their hands. I still think you got to get it to them some. But I don't know. Everybody seems to think the Packers are going to throw it 40 times at least in this game because of how vulnerable Baltimore is in the secondary. But, you never know how these things will go. And these game plans, sometimes it's, all the plans of mice and men, and they go out the window. So we'll see.
So the old adage is the run opens up the pass, but you're saying in this particular situation, use the pass to open up the run.
Yeah, and that's kind of how this league kind of works for most teams now. It's pass-first league. So, yeah, I could see that where they just come out throwing, throwing, and then, you try to get the defense on his heels and slow them down a little bit and get those linebackers to expect pass, and then maybe you can run the ball a little better.
I will say this. Every time Pete has thrown a prediction out like this since I've been on this beat, he has been on the money. So if he's telling you, if there's a prop bet that says the Packers' first 5 plays are going to be passes, I'd go take it because Pete just told you that's what's going to happen. So
I think you're only remembering the times I'm right.
They're easy to remember because you haven't been wrong.
Yeah.
I'm trying to help you out here. I'm trying to make these people money, prop you up. Sorry, my phone was going off.
I think Corey Bahor. I see there's some people have been asking about Bajorquez, and you got no indication from practice this week, right? I wonder. I do wonder if they're going to use him on kickoffs. See if because when it gets cold, you lose a good 5 yards on those. And Crosby the other night just looked like there's no way he's getting the ball deep enough in the end zone where it'll be touchback. And if you're playing the Packers, even if it's 5 yards deep, you're bringing it back anyway. So I wonder if Bajorquez can knock it out of the end zone. I guess we'll see what they think there and on Sunday.
Both Matt LaFleur and Maurice Drayton, when asked about touchbacks or kicking it out of bounds this week, made the comments, we are a directional punting and kicking team. So do you think they're even trying?
I wonder if they're, punting, you need to be directional. And that's where they got, Bajorquez has had a great year, but he put both of those returns were too far towards the middle of the field and the hang time wasn't good. So even though the distance was good, it was a good returnable punt if you're the receiving team. Kickoffs, you're directional unless, one, if you think you can pin them down, from the 20 or inside instead of giving them the ball at 25. Or the other is if you don't think your guy can knock it out of the end zone. Mm-hmm. So if they still consider themselves that, I wonder if they've realized or found out or know that Bajorquez can't do the kicking off, or, maybe they're being coy and actually are going to spring Bajorquez on the Ravens.
Yeah. And I do think as far as like his performance that Chicago was – and you may disagree, but I think Chicago was a little bit of an anomaly just when you look at his performance overall and who Chicago does have in their return game.
Yeah, he's been great this season. I mean, really, best punting that I've seen here for ages. Really, he's been really, really good. Mm-hmm. He just had a bad game. And the one thing was, people were surprised that, Grant returned that ball from the 3 or from, was it 93 yards or 97 yards?
It was 97 yards.
97. So from the 3, I remember watching a Bears game this year, and I can't tell you who it was against. He returned a punt that he caught in the end zone.
Yeah, 9 yards in the end zone.
So,
that's the back.
So they love this guy, and he's really dynamic, and it should have surprised nobody on the Packers that he returned a ball kicked to the 3.
Yeah. Aaron Rodgers said this week on the Pat McAfee show that sometimes he would turn on Bears games just to watch Grant and to see how many risky returns he would make and usually turn into something positive.
He usually would turn him. He's a pretty fun, exciting, dynamic guy to watch, isn't he?
He is. He was very fun because he did stuff you're not technically on paper supposed to do.
Yeah.
That the coaches tell you not to do, and he found a way to make it work. I think when he returned the one for a touchdown, he started to cut right, and then he cut back left, and as soon as he bounced back, it was like he's gone. And he was still within the 10-yard line at that point, but you just knew at that point he saw something and he knew he had it.
Yeah, he also had that end around or jet sweep where it was for a touchdown, right?
Yeah, it was.
He beat everybody to the corner.
He lined up in the backfield and then cut across the middle of the field.
Pretty exciting guy. Now I saw one of the questions was, will the Packers draft a punt returner this year? Look, they need a lot of different things. They're going to have to do some roster purging. So they need a lot. Almost everything's in play for the draft. But yeah, I gotta think they need to add somebody who, if that's almost all he does, it's probably worth it. Teams don't like to do it as much now because the kickoff game has been diminished because a lot of teams kick the ball out of the end zone. But man, this year is showing, how much you need competent returning in this league.
They need a guy like Grant. And so
it would help them out a lot.
Exactly. We'll have to tune in to college games a little bit here. The bowl games are going on right now. If you want to tune in, I think you could watch the Bahama Bowl today. Wouldn't you like to go cover the Bahama Bowl, Pete?
Is it in the Bahamas or is it the Tommy Bahama Bowl?
No, it is in the Bahamas, the actual Bahamas.
And yes, I would love to be covering that game.
Well, instead, we're going to go to Baltimore. We'll get some crab sandwich. We'll get some crab cakes. It'll all be worth it.
Baltimore's a cool city. Yeah, it'll be fun.
It is. We'll go visit Edgar Allan Poe's bar or something. We'll let Pete quote poetry and we'll post a video for you. But like I said, yes, we will be there for you to cover it all, top to bottom in Baltimore, as the Packers get ready to take on the Ravens. Stick with PackersNews.com for full coverage for the weekend. Thanks so much, guys.